Emily's alarm clock buzzed at 6 in the morning, just like it did every day. She rubbed her tired eyes, wishing she could sleep a little longer, but she knew she couldn't. Rent was due in a week, and she had only managed to save half of it. Missing a day of work wasn't an option. She sat up, glanced around her small one-room apartment, and let out a soft sigh. The paint on the walls was peeling, the carpet was old, and the tiny kitchen corner was barely big enough for a single person to cook. But this was all she could afford, and she reminded herself that at least she had a roof over her head. After getting dressed in her faded waitress uniform, she tied her hair back into a ponytail and forced a smile in front of the mirror. Another day, Emily, she whispered to herself. She always believed that no matter how she felt, she had to look cheerful at work. Customers didn't want to see a sad face serving them breakfast. The diner where she worked was just a 15-minute walk away. The morning air was cool, and the streets were quiet as she made her way down the familiar path. Emily often used this time to clear her mind. She thought about the bills waiting on her kitchen table, the small debt she still had from medical expenses for her mother, and how her shoes were wearing out. But she pushed those thoughts away, telling herself she would somehow get through it. She always did. When she arrived at the diner, the manager gave her a quick nod. The place wasn't fancy, just a small, cozy spot where locals came for coffee, pancakes, and friendly conversation. The red booths were worn, and the menu hadn't changed in years, but regular customers loved it. Emily grabbed her notepad and pen, ready to take orders. As the first customers trickled in, she greeted each one with a bright good morning. Her smile was genuine, even though her stomach growled. Most mornings, she skipped breakfast to save money, surviving on the occasional cup of free coffee from the diner's pot. She didn't want anyone to notice, so she stayed busy, pouring coffee refills and taking orders with cheerful energy. Emily's co-workers admired her spirit. Even when she was clearly tired, she never complained. She had a gentle way with people, listening when an old man wanted to talk about his late wife, laughing at the silly jokes from teenagers, or comforting a young mother who was overwhelmed with her children. People noticed her kindness, though few knew how difficult her own life was. Her manager sometimes told her, "Emily, you've got a heart of gold. Customers love you." She would smile, but inside, she wondered how far kindness alone could take her. At the end of the day, kindness didn't pay the bills. As the morning rush picked up, Emily moved quickly from table to table. She balanced plates of eggs and bacon, poured steaming coffee into mugs, and scribbled down orders with practiced ease. Her feet ached, but she ignored it. She was used to long shifts and little rest. Between serving customers, her mind wandered to her dreams. She often imagined what it would be like to have her own little cafe, a place filled with laughter, warm smells of fresh bread, and a welcoming atmosphere. She pictured herself greeting people at the door, not as a tired waitress, but as the proud owner. It felt like an impossible dream, but still, it gave her hope on the hardest days. By late morning, the diner was filled with chatter. Families, workers on break, and students all came in. Emily's smile never left her face, though her body was growing tired. She noticed every little detail: how a man stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, how a child's eyes lit up at the sight of pancakes, how an older woman carefully counted coins before placing her order. Emily always had compassion for those who struggled. She knew what it felt like to count every cent and wonder how to stretch it for the week. That was why, whenever she could, she quietly slipped an extra cookie to a child or refilled a coffee cup without charging. She didn't have much, but she gave what she could. Her kindness was not for recognition or reward, it was simply who she was. She believed that the world could be a little softer if people helped each other in small ways. That morning, as the clock ticked past 11, Emily leaned against the counter for a brief moment, wiping her hands on her apron. She glanced outside the large diner window, watching the gray clouds gathering. It looked like rain was coming. Something inside her told her the day would bring something different, though she couldn't explain why. She shook off the thought and went back to work, moving quickly to serve a new customer who had just walked in. She didn't know that her ordinary day was about to change. She didn't know that her small acts of kindness, given freely even when she had so little, would soon open doors she had never imagined. Emily only knew one thing: life was hard, but she had learned to face it with a smile. She believed that no matter how tough things were, kindness had a way of coming back around, though she had no idea how true that would soon prove to be. The morning rush had just started to slow down, and Emily finally had a chance to take a deep breath. She leaned against the counter for a second, stretching her tired shoulders. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Emily quickly straightened up, ready to greet whoever had come in. A man stepped through the door, holding the small hand of a little girl. Emily's eyes softened the moment she saw them. The man looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped as though he carried the weight of the world. His clothes were neat but old, the kind of clothes that had been washed many times. His shoes were scuffed, and his hair looked like it hadn't been cut in a while. Beside him, the little girl clutched his hand tightly. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with curious eyes that darted around the diner. Her small coat seemed too thin for the chilly weather outside. Emily's heart tugged at the sight of them. She recognized the look in the man's eyes, the quiet hesitation of someone who was not sure if he could afford to sit down in a place like this. She had seen it before in other customers, people who wanted to enjoy a meal but were worried about the cost. "Good morning," Emily said warmly, her smile lighting up her face. "Table for two." The man gave a small nod, his lips pressed into a thin line as if he didn't want to speak too much. Emily led them to a booth near the window. The little girl slid onto the seat, her legs dangling above the floor, while the man sat down slowly, as though he was more tired than he wanted to admit. Emily handed them menus, though she already sensed they wouldn't be ordering much. The man glanced at the menu quickly, then looked away, his hand tightening around his daughter's. The little girl leaned forward, her eyes wide as she stared at the pictures of pancakes and waffles. Emily pretended not to notice the way the man's eyes flickered with worry. She gave them a few minutes before returning with her notepad. "What can I get you this morning?" she asked gently. The man cleared his throat, his voice low. "Just a coffee, please." Emily looked at the little girl, who was staring down at the table now, avoiding her eyes. The disappointment was clear on her small face. Emily's heart ached. She thought about how often she had gone hungry as a child, how her mother used to skip meals so that she and her siblings could eat. "Of course," Emily said softly. "One coffee. And how about for you, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up quickly, her eyes flicking to her father. He gave her a small shake of the head, and she lowered her gaze again. "I'm okay," she whispered, though the longing in her voice was impossible to miss. Emily forced her smile to stay steady, though inside, she felt her chest tighten. She had seen this scene before, a parent too proud to admit they couldn't afford food for their child. She didn't want to embarrass him, but she also couldn't ignore it. "I'll be right back," she said cheerfully, walking back toward the counter. As she poured the coffee, she made a quick decision. She grabbed a plate and placed a small stack of pancakes on it, adding a drizzle of syrup and a pat of butter on top. Then she added a glass of milk, setting it on the tray with the coffee. When she returned to the table, she placed the coffee in front of the man. "Here you go, sir," she said. Then she turned to the little girl with a wink. "And this is our special today, just for you." The girl's eyes widened in surprise. "For me?" she asked, her small voice filled with hope. Emily nodded. "Yes, for you. We like to treat our guests sometimes." The little girl looked at her father, uncertain. The man's eyes met Emily's, and for a moment, he seemed ready to refuse. But when he saw the gentle kindness in Emily's expression, he stopped. His lips pressed together, and he gave her the smallest of nods. "Say thank you," he told his daughter quietly. "Thank you," the girl said, her face lighting up as she picked up her fork eagerly. Emily smiled and walked away, giving them privacy. From behind the counter, she watched as the girl took her first bite, her smile growing even wider. The father sat back, sipping his coffee, his expression unreadable, though his eyes lingered on Emily for longer than most customers ever did. The diner grew busier again, and Emily moved quickly between tables, but she kept glancing at the pair near the window. Something about them stayed in her mind. The way the man carried himself, quiet but heavy-hearted. The way the little girl tried to hide her excitement, as if she wasn't used to having something special. When she passed their table again, the little girl grinned at her. "These are the best pancakes ever," she said happily. Emily laughed softly. "I'm glad you like them." The man gave her another quiet nod, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe. Or perhaps it was something deeper, something unspoken. They stayed for a while, the man slowly drinking his coffee while his daughter finished every bite of the pancakes. When they finally stood to leave, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. He placed them on the table carefully, making sure it covered the coffee but not the pancakes. Emily didn't say a word. She simply picked up the money after they left and slipped it into the register, pretending it was the right amount. As the door closed behind them, Emily felt a strange warmth in her chest. She didn't know who they were or what their story was, but something told her that their paths had crossed for a reason. She brushed the thought aside and went back to work, not knowing that this small moment would ripple into something much bigger. Outside, the rain finally began to fall, and through the diner window, Emily watched the man and his little girl walk down the street, hand in hand. They looked like just another struggling family, blending into the crowd. But Emily didn't realize that their story was far from ordinary, and that her small act of kindness had already started to change the course of her own life. The next morning began like any other for Emily. The alarm buzzed, the small apartment felt colder than usual, and she pushed herself out of bed with the same determination that kept her going every day. She walked to the diner as the sun tried to break through the gray clouds. It felt like a regular day, yet she couldn't help but think about the man and his little daughter she had served the day before. Their faces lingered in her mind. She wondered if they had eaten again, if the girl had smiled after leaving, and if the father had felt even a little lighter because of the small kindness she had shown. When she stepped into the diner, her manager gave her a nod, and she tied on her apron. The place smelled of fresh coffee and buttered toast. Emily threw herself into her routine, taking orders, pouring coffee, and greeting the familiar customers who often came in around the same time each morning. She tried to focus, but deep down, she found herself scanning the door each time it opened, as though she was waiting for someone. And then, just before 9, the bell jingled. Emily turned, and there they were, the same man and his daughter. The little girl spotted Emily right away and waved, her eyes bright. Emily's heart warmed, and she waved back with a smile. "Good morning," she greeted them, walking over. "It's nice to see you again." The man nodded slightly, still reserved, but the girl spoke up quickly. "We came back," she said with excitement, as though this diner was already her favorite place. Emily laughed softly. "I'm glad you did. Let me get you settled." She led them to the same booth near the window, noticing how the man seemed less hesitant this time. He still looked tired, but there was a gentleness in his eyes as he watched his daughter climb onto the seat. She handed them menus, though she already suspected what would happen. Sure enough, the man only asked for coffee again. But before Emily could say anything, the little girl piped up, "Do you have those pancakes again?" Emily grinned. "Yes, we do." She glanced at the man, who looked caught between saying no and giving in. His lips parted, but he didn't stop his daughter this time. Emily understood. Without making a big deal, she nodded. "One order of pancakes, coming right up. And coffee for you, sir." As she walked back to the counter, she felt a quiet joy in her chest. She didn't care that she was paying for the pancakes again. Something about the little girl reminded her of herself when she was young, longing for small joys, depending on the kindness of others. When she brought the food, the little girl beamed, digging in happily. Emily noticed the man watching his daughter with a soft expression, one that mixed pride and sadness. He didn't touch any food himself, only sipping his coffee. Emily hesitated, then said gently, "You should try something too. Breakfast is important." The man gave her a polite smile but shook his head. "Coffee is enough." His voice was deep but quiet, carrying a weight Emily couldn't quite understand. She didn't press him. Instead, she talked to the little girl. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied between bites of pancake. "That's a beautiful name," Emily said warmly. She glanced at the father. "And you?" "David," he answered shortly, though his eyes softened when he looked at Lily. "Well, it's nice to officially meet you both," Emily said with her usual cheerful tone. She didn't pry further, sensing that David was a man who kept his life private. As the morning went on, Emily served other customers, but she always kept an eye on their booth. Lily giggled at something her father whispered, her small hands sticky with syrup, while David sat quietly, occasionally glancing at Emily with a thoughtful look. When they finished, David placed money on the table again, enough for his coffee, and stood to leave. Emily waved at Lily, who waved back enthusiastically. As they stepped outside into the cool air, Emily felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just another pair of customers. Somehow, this father and daughter had left a mark on her heart. Over the next week, they returned several times. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes later in the afternoon when the diner was quiet. Each time, David only ordered coffee, and each time, Emily found a way to bring pancakes for Lily without making it obvious that she paid. She would joke that it was on special or that kids eat free today. Lily accepted these explanations happily, while David remained silent, though his eyes often lingered on Emily with a look she couldn't decipher. One afternoon, when the diner was nearly empty, Emily found herself with a chance to sit for a moment at their table. Lily was coloring on a napkin with a crayon Emily had given her, while David sipped his coffee slowly. "You're very kind," David said suddenly, his voice low. Emily blinked in surprise. It was the first time he had spoken more than a few words to her. "I just like to help when I can," she said honestly. "I know what it's like to have hard days." He studied her for a moment, as though he wanted to ask more, but then he only nodded. "Not many people are like that." Emily shrugged with a smile. "Maybe not. But I think kindness makes the world easier to carry, even if it's just in small ways." Lily looked up from her napkin drawing and grinned. "You're my favorite waitress," she announced. Emily laughed. "Well, that's the best compliment I've had all day." For the first time, she saw a faint smile tug at the corner of David's mouth. It was small, almost hidden, but it was there. And Emily realized that beneath his quiet, guarded nature, there was a man who loved his daughter deeply and who carried something heavy inside him. After they left that day, Emily couldn't stop thinking about them. She wondered what their story was, why they seemed to be struggling, and what had brought them to this small town diner. She had met many customers, but something about David and Lily felt different, as though fate had placed them in her path for a reason. As she closed the diner that evening, wiping down tables and turning off lights, Emily thought about how life had a way of surprising her. She had so little to give, yet giving it brought her more joy than anything else. She didn't know it yet, but her small acts of kindness were building a bridge between her world and theirs, one that would soon change everything she thought she knew about life, about chance meetings, and about the quiet power of compassion. Days turned into weeks, and by now, the sight of David and little Lily walking into the diner had become familiar to Emily. She always felt a quiet happiness when she saw them push open the glass door, the bell jingling above their heads. Lily would run to the booth by the window as if it was her special spot, while David followed slowly behind, his face calm but unreadable. Each visit was almost the same. David ordered only coffee, and Emily found a way to place pancakes in front of Lily, pretending it was another diner special. Emily didn't mind. In fact, she looked forward to it. There was something about the pair that made her want to give without thinking twice. Perhaps it was Lily's sweet smile, or maybe it was the sadness David tried to hide behind his quiet nature. One afternoon, when the diner was quieter than usual, Emily had more time to watch them. She noticed how David's clothes, though clean, were always the same. His shoes looked more worn each time, and she wondered if he was sacrificing everything for his daughter. He never ordered food for himself, not even a sandwich, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if he was skipping meals. Her heart ached at the thought, but she also admired him. She could see how much he loved his daughter, how his eyes softened whenever Lily laughed, how he always made sure she was warm, how he let her eat even if he went hungry. Emily respected that kind of devotion. It reminded her of her own mother, who had always put her children first no matter how little they had. That evening, after the dinner crowd had left, Emily was cleaning the counter when she noticed David still sitting at his booth. Lily had fallen asleep with her head resting on his arm. David sat quietly, staring out of the window at the falling rain. His coffee cup was empty, but he didn't seem ready to leave. Emily hesitated, then walked over with a warm smile. "Would you like a refill?" she asked softly, not wanting to wake Lily. David looked up, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she saw something different in his eyes, something heavy, like a storm he was keeping inside. He nodded, and she poured more coffee into his cup. "You're always very kind," he said quietly, almost as though he was talking more to himself than to her. Emily smiled. "It's nothing, really. I know what it's like to have people look the other way when you're struggling. I don't want to be that kind of person." For a moment, David didn't reply. He just stirred his coffee slowly. Then, almost as if the words had been waiting to escape, he spoke. "Most people don't see past what's in front of them. They only care when there's something in it for them." Emily tilted her head, sensing the weight behind his words. "Maybe. But I think there are still people out there who care without expecting anything back." David looked at her then, really looked at her. His gaze was intense, and it made Emily's heart beat a little faster, though she didn't know why. "You're different," he said softly. Emily felt her cheeks warm. She shrugged lightly, trying to hide her flustered reaction. "I just try to do the right thing." Before David could say more, Lily stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. Emily smiled at the little girl. "Did you have a nice nap, sweetheart?" Lily nodded sleepily, leaning against her father. David gently brushed her hair back, his expression softening. He looked at Emily again, almost as if he wanted to say something important, but instead he only said, "Thank you, for everything." After they left that night, Emily couldn't stop thinking about his words. She lay awake in her small apartment, wondering about David's life. Why did he carry so much sadness in his eyes? What had happened to him? And why did she feel like there was more to his story than he let on? The next few visits only deepened the mystery. Emily noticed things, small details that didn't quite add up. Sometimes, David's phone would ring, and he would quickly silence it, a look of irritation flashing across his face. Once, she caught a glimpse of the screen before he tucked it away. It wasn't the kind of old phone she expected someone struggling to have. It was sleek and expensive, completely out of place compared to the rest of him. Another time, she noticed the way a man in a suit glanced at David when he walked past the diner window, almost as if he recognized him. David pretended not to notice, keeping his focus on Lily. Emily's curiosity grew, but she didn't ask. She knew it wasn't her place. All she knew for certain was that David was not an ordinary struggling father. There was something about him, something hidden. One evening, when the diner was closing, Emily stepped outside to take the trash out. She spotted David across the street, speaking quietly to a man she didn't recognize. The man seemed nervous, almost apologetic, while David's expression was serious, his posture commanding in a way Emily had never seen before. For a brief second, she thought she saw the real David, the man behind the quiet act. Before she could process what she had seen, David turned, noticed her, and the expression on his face softened immediately. He picked up Lily, who had been holding his hand, and walked away as though nothing had happened. Emily's mind spun with questions. Who was he, really? Why was he hiding? And why did he keep coming back to her diner, of all places? That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something important. No matter who David really was, he had shown her nothing but respect and quiet gratitude. And no matter what secrets he carried, he was a father who clearly adored his daughter. That, to Emily, was what mattered most. What she didn't know was that David's secret was far bigger than she could have imagined. She couldn't have guessed that the man she thought was struggling was actually a millionaire, living a life far different from what he showed her. And soon, the truth would come out in a way that would change her life forever. The morning started quietly at the diner. Emily polished the counter, humming softly to herself as she waited for the first customers. The sun was shining after days of rain, and the golden light filled the small space, making it feel brighter than usual. She felt a strange energy in the air, as though something important was about to happen. When the door opened, Emily looked up, expecting one of the regulars. But instead, it was David and Lily. They looked the same as always, David in his worn jacket, Lily clutching his hand with her bright smile. Emily's face lit up automatically. "Good morning. Your table's waiting," she said, guiding them to their usual booth. Lily slid into her seat with excitement. "Do you have the pancakes again?" she asked. Emily laughed. "For you, always." She wrote down the order even though she didn't need to and turned to David. "Coffee?" He nodded, but there was something different in his eyes today. They weren't as guarded, and when he looked at Emily, it was as though he was carrying a secret he was finally ready to share. She brought their food and coffee, chatting with Lily while David stayed quiet, watching them both. Emily noticed his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. It wasn't like him. For the first time, she sensed that he was nervous. After Lily was settled with her plate, David cleared his throat. "Emily," he said slowly, his deep voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. She looked at him curiously. "Yes." He hesitated, as though choosing his words carefully. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice so Lily wouldn't hear. "There's something I need to tell you." Emily froze, her heart beating faster. She didn't know why, but something told her this was the moment she had been waiting for, the answer to all the questions she hadn't dared to ask. David's eyes held hers. "You've been kind to us. Kinder than you had to be. I need you to know the truth. I'm not who you think I am." Emily frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I'm not struggling the way it looks. The truth is, I'm wealthy. More than wealthy, actually. I own several businesses. I live in a world most people don't even imagine." Emily stared at him, stunned. For a moment, she thought he was joking. But there was no humor in his voice, no hint of a smile on his face. He was serious. Her eyes flickered to his jacket, his worn shoes, the simple way he carried himself. "But, why," she whispered. "Why come here looking like this?" David's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. "Because I needed to know if there were still people who saw me for me. Not for my money. Not for what I could give them. Just me." He glanced at Lily, who was happily eating her pancakes, syrup on her cheeks. "And I wanted Lily to grow up seeing that kindness exists, even when you have nothing to give back." Emily's breath caught. Her mind swirled with memories: the way he silenced expensive-looking phones, the strange meeting outside, the watchful glances from strangers who seemed to recognize him. It all made sense now. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why me?" David met her eyes again, and for the first time, his voice softened in a way that felt almost vulnerable. "Because you didn't hesitate. You didn't know who I was, and still you gave. When you had so little yourself, you gave. You reminded me that there's still goodness in the world, and I can't ignore that." Emily's cheeks flushed, her heart racing. She didn't know what to say. She had never thought of her actions as anything special. To her, it was simple: if someone was hungry, you fed them. If someone was sad, you showed them kindness. That was all. David reached into his pocket and placed a card on the table. It was sleek, with his name embossed in elegant letters. Emily picked it up with trembling fingers, her eyes widening as she read. It confirmed everything he had said. He wasn't just wealthy, he was one of those men whose names appeared in magazines, though she had never paid attention to that kind of world. She looked up at him, speechless. "I want to help you, Emily," David said firmly. "You've given without expecting anything in return. Now it's my turn. Tell me, what's your dream?" Emily blinked, stunned. "My dream?" "Yes," he said, his gaze steady. "What would you do if money wasn't holding you back?" Her voice trembled as she spoke. I've always wanted to open my own cafe. A place where people could feel at home. Where no one feels invisible. But," she shook her head. "It's just a dream. People like me don't get chances like that." David leaned forward. "Now you do. I want to make it happen. I'll invest in you. You don't owe me anything, just promise me you'll keep being the person you are. Keep giving, keep smiling, keep showing kindness. That's all I ask." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed, but she couldn't stop the flood of emotion rising inside her. For so long, she had carried her struggles quietly, never expecting anyone to notice, let alone to offer her a way out. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. David's answer was simple. "Because you reminded me that money isn't everything. And because I want Lily to grow up knowing that kindness is worth more than gold." At that moment, Lily looked up from her pancakes and smiled at Emily. "Daddy says you're our friend," she said innocently. Emily's heart melted. She smiled back, her voice trembling. "I'd be honored to be your friend, Lily." The rest of the day felt like a dream. David explained that he would arrange everything: paperwork, funding, even a location he already had in mind. Emily could hardly believe it was real. She kept expecting to wake up back in her small apartment, but every time she looked at David and saw the sincerity in his eyes, she realized it was truly happening. Weeks later, Emily stood in front of her very own cafe. The sign above the door carried the name she had chosen, one that meant hope and warmth. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and baked goods. The place was filled with laughter and the sound of clinking cups, just as she had always imagined. David and Lily were there on opening day, sitting at the very first table. Lily had her favorite pancakes in front of her, and David sipped his coffee with a rare smile. He raised his cup toward Emily in a silent toast, pride shining in his eyes. Emily looked around, tears of joy brimming in her eyes. All of it, the struggles, the long days, the moments when she thought she would never get out of poverty, had led her here. And it had all started with one simple act of kindness, buying a coffee for a tired father and a plate of pancakes for his hungry daughter. She learned that day that even the smallest actions could change a life. And sometimes, when you least expect it, kindness comes back to you in ways more powerful than you ever imagined.